one step. Okay. I think we should be on any second now here.
It says live in the top little left-hand corner for me, so I think we are live. Yeah.
Yes, I believe we're live. Okay, yes, we're seeing from the chat here, people are saying good evening already. So, hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And this is the RPG Pundit Encounter, episode 2. And I have with me tonight the guy who was meant to be the first guest in episode 1, but we had big technical issues. Now that I've switched to StreamYard, that's been resolved. But he couldn't make it to the rescheduled episode 1, so we've got him here for episode 2. And I think most of you who are going to be here are going to know this person, just because if you're a fan of mine, you're probably a fan of his. But just in case, I will say this is Alexander Macris, who is he's the creator of the Adventure Conqueror King system, which is one of the very significant second wave OSR products that was a big hit in its original edition, and it's now on a second edition. Aside from that, he's also created Ascendant, I think it's called, which is a superhero RPG, and a book called Arbiter of Worlds, which is, I believe, a book about DMing. Beyond that, however, he has a larger portfolio where he was for some time a boss of Defy Media, and specifically the editor, am I correct, editor-in-chief or something like that, of the Escapist?
That's right. Founder, publisher, and eventually editor-in-chief, yeah.
There we go. And he's done some other things, including at one point having been like manager to Milo Yiannopoulos.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And I'm sure he's got some other projects that I probably don't know about. I'm going to give us a little bit of time now because we've got there's quite a few of you already here, but you know, it always takes people a few minutes to get onto the chat. So the first thing I'm going to say is, oh yes, that's right. That's the first thing I'm going to say before anything else, because this is a very special offer that we have tonight. As you know, when I'm live streaming, I'm not having it monetized at the time of the live streaming. But so we always appreciate super chats. But today there's like a special circumstance to the super chat, which is that everybody who gives a super chat of $5 or more will receive, and this is it's not something that I came up with, but it was an offer that was presented to me by Venture Satanis. They will receive a copy of the Shadow Chalt PDF from Venture Satanis for anybody who has given a $5 super chat or more. You will, if you do the super chat, we will take your name and we'll make sure that Venture gets a hold of you somehow. I mean, you'll have to give us a, what did he say here? Yeah, he says just have folks who donate to your live stream send their drive-through email addresses to Venger, and he'll dole out the PDFs within a couple of days. Okay, so if anyone's interested in the Shadow Chalt PDF, this is the way to get it. Besides that, I'll say, we will be answering your questions tonight, as well as the prepared interview questions I have. And to check out the various products, I'm going to, after the interview, I'm going to add, because I forgot to do that at the beginning here, to add links specifically that Archon wants me to put on there for his products and what he's got going on right now, or what he would like you to take a look at. And of course, I also have already in the description my standard spiel there, which is all of the various products that I have going on right now. Of course, there's Baptism of Fire, which is my best-selling. It was 8.5 weeks. It was #1 on the OSR list in Drive-Thru RPG. It was also #1 overall for a somewhat shorter time.
That's awesome.
It is role-playing in historically authentic, mythical Piast, Poland in the 11th century. It's a big book, as you can see. It's kind of a revised edition of Lion and Dragon. And so be sure to check that out. Also, be sure to check out the Pundit Files, which is available only from the Red Room store. It's my new periodical, the one that replaced RPG Pundit Presents. And right now, the latest issue is issue number 22, More Medieval Chinese Martial Arts. Issue 3 introduced the Renegade Martial Artist class for theoretically for Sword and Caravan, but it's usable in any Lion and Dragon campaign too. And I had produced guidelines for the several martial art techniques that were prevalent in the Song Empire. In issue 22, I've added another number of techniques that are somewhat more esoteric techniques that date from the same period or earlier, and that just gives you some extra styles to add if you're running a kung fu heavy Sword and Caravan campaign or any other type of OSR campaign that you want to try out. You can only get the Pundit Files on the Red Room, and they each issue costs just $3.50. So if you can get someone to give you $3.50, you can buy an issue of the Pundit Files. All right, so we've got while we're waiting to just give people enough time to get on, we have here a question already. Dino Diaz Knight asked the question I'm sure a lot of people might be interested in. He says, question for Alex, what is the current target date for ACKS 2 availability?
Oh, great question. So I intend to be sending out the PDFs for ACKS 2 this weekend. So all of the backers will get them then. I will then bring them onto Drive-Thru RPG in PDF format in November. The actual hardcover books will follow in Q1 2025. So I had hoped to have them done for November 2024, but the art turned out to take longer than I had anticipated. It was my first time doing 3 books of this length. It was, my largest project previously was 500 pages, and this was, I think, almost 1,600 pages across the 3 books. And I just misunderestimated the amount of time required to get all that art done. So
that is a big project.
It was a big project, yeah. Yeah. So Q1 2025 for hardcover and next month for PDF.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so I suppose we should get started here.
All right, I'm ready.
As much time as I can afford to give. We're going to have this show's going to be about 90 minutes, just so everyone knows. And let's see, where is my? No, that's the wrong thing. Got to look up my questions. Oh, here we go. All right, so my first question. So you've been in not just the RPG hobby, but kind of involved in the gaming hobby and geek hobby in general for quite some time now. Mm-hmm. Who has been good to you and who has been bad to you?
Oh man, that is an interesting question because the answer would change radically over the years. So, I could roughly divide my career, but let's call it like circa 2005 to 2016, and then 2016 to the present. So one being like an 11-year period, the other being about an 8-year period. In the first 10, 11 years, I would say everybody was pretty good to me. I had a wide range of friends across the spectrum, and it was a pretty good time to be in the game industry. It was a lot of fun. Sometime around 2013, 2014, things got more toxic, and politics began to tear people apart. And I lost a lot of friends, made some new friends. So, right now, I would say primarily most of my quote unquote allies or people that are good to me are within the old school Renaissance space, more on either the more historically minded folks like yourself or the more simulation minded folks. The story game folks and the art punk folks have gone their own way. But like Jim Searcy at Studio 2 has been great. He's been my distributor for many years. The folks at Drive Through RPG have always been very kind to me. You yourself have always been very kind. Between your YouTube shows and your forums and whatnot that you've run. Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone particular. I guess I could think of it. David Campetti, who is my art agent, helps me source artists, has been a super big ally. Obviously, all the backers. I mean, some of my backers have put in so much money over the years that they're basically investors. You put 2,500 in every Kickstarter for 10 years. That's a lot of money. So those guys have been life changing for me. There's one backer out in Southeast Asia who literally became an investor, just called me up one day and said, "Hey, want to put some money in." So, real range of characters. Went through some tough years there, and hopefully I'm out hopefully in the bright side of everybody loving me again.
That's good. I suppose you've had some ups and downs over the course of the years in terms of just how many friends and enemies you might have had.
Yes.
Is there a point that was, let's say, the lowest point thus far, and since then you've started to turn things around?
Oh yeah. So if we go back to circa 2014, the Gamergate era. So all of a sudden,
and Consultant Gate, don't forget that one.
And Consultant Gate, yeah, I wasn't involved with that one, but I was definitely involved in Gamergate, and I had built my whole career on the basis of the Escapist, which was supposed to be like Rolling Stone for gamers. It was a gamer culture magazine in the same way that you had like Cinephile magazines and Gearhead magazines and things like that. Yeah. Obviously on the web, but it was a web magazine. And then all of a sudden, sort of the powers that be declared that gaming culture was uniquely toxic, and gamers didn't have to be our audience anymore. And I tried to explain at the time. I was like, we're part of a conglomerate here at Defy Media. We're literally gamers do have to be our audience because they already have a bunch of other websites for other audiences. It really does. And the folks at the time didn't want to hear that. And so I would say, probably like that year of Gamergate was my first wave of losing a lot of friends. And then, after that, I got put in charge of Break at Defy Media. Escapist ended up getting sunsetted over that for a whole host of issues. I got put in charge of Break over Defy Media, which was a huge website. It was a comedy website, but it had been declining in size year over year over year. And so they gave it to me as like, hey, can you turn this around? And we did. We turned it around, and it grew explosively. We were doing billions of video views. Break was doing more video views than the whole rest of Defy Media put together. And then, the CEO pulled me aside and he said, your editorial sensibilities don't really match the company's values. And I didn't know what to say. I was like, well, what are the company's values? Failure? Like, what's the problem? And, they didn't like the audience because it was right-leaning white men, basically. And so at that point, I kind of realized, like, here was me. I had done this huge turnaround on this brand, and I thought my career was set, right? Like, I was expecting to be promoted to chief creative officer, and they passed me over and kind of let me know that wasn't ever going to happen. So then after that, I worked with Milo for 6 months, and he had a very, very severe meltdown. That business ended very badly. That was probably my lowest of low point. Like, at that point, I had lost 80% of my business contacts. My income had dropped 95% because I was canceled and couldn't find a job. And I just had to start from that and build Autark up into something that could sustain me. So I would say like 2013, 2017, that 3-year period was shit.
And was there something specific that you could point to that turned everything around?
I mean, if it was anything, it was ACKS 2. Actually, I should say it was two things. It was one, as I mentioned, I had this this backer that played in my campaigns and had been supporting me. on Kickstarter that reached out to me, put an investment in at a really critical moment. And that was in 2020. And then it was ACKS 2 in 2023. I mean, if ACKS 2 had flopped, I probably would be out of the RPG business, right? Like I just would say, I can't make a living here. So the fact it did really well has enabled me to keep going and kind of remoralize me. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit, and tell the audience a little bit more about ACKS 2. And I know that I've covered it. I think last time we interviewed you, back in the Inappropriate Characters Day, I covered this a little bit. But what's the main difference, I guess, let's say, between the first edition of ACKS and what does ACKS 2 bring that's new into the table, let's say?
Well, I had initially planned to just kind of consolidate all of the material I had created since ACKS 1. ACKS 1 came out in 2012, so it was 12 years ago. The gap in editions was longer than the gap in any edition of D&D. So it's just like I had created a lot of material, and I thought, I'll just kind of pull it all together into a compendium. But then the perfidious treachery of Wizards of the Coast resulted in them pulling the open game license. And, and saying they were canceling it, et cetera. Now, obviously, they backtrack on that. But my sense is that when a corporation makes it clear that they intend to fuck you over, you shouldn't believe them when they're like, oh, our bad, right? Like, they're just going to find another way to do it later. So at that point, I said, I'm going to get the game off the open game license, and I'm going to rebuild it. And so ACKS 2 is basically, it's a rebuilding of ACKS 1, removed from the open game license. With all of the material that I had written consolidated into it, but a lot of new material because I had to pull out old stuff and put in new stuff, right? Like I had to pull out some of the monsters and put in new monsters, pull out the spells, put in new spells, things like that. The core rules now include a lot of material that ACKS 1 didn't cover because it's got stuff from all of my axioms, e-zines, it's got Heroic Fantasy Handbook, supplemental rules, layers and encounter supplemental rules. So it's much more robust. It's much more comprehensive. And it's very much, I would say, it's the game that ACKS was aiming to be, but didn't quite get to be. And ACKS 2 is that game that I wanted to create. So.
We have a super chat here, a $10 super chat from Thane08. Thank you very much. I will repeat for those of you who have arrived since I mentioned it. Today there's a special promotion, I guess you could say, on behalf of Venture Satanis. He has said that anybody who does a $5 or higher super chat, if they send him their drive-through email address, he will give them a donated copy of Shadow Chalt PDF. That's, I think, his newest product. So if you like Venture Satanis, here's a good opportunity. Sending in a $5 or higher super chat, you will be getting a copy of Shadow Chalt if you get in touch with him. So Thing08, $10 super chat. He says, as ACKS 2 stands out in its phases of play, what were the biggest challenges in balancing them, and how did you ensure that they remain engaging while still feeling cohesive within the overall system?
That's a great question. So by far, the biggest challenge is making sure that magic does not overshadow everything to the point where you don't really need to proceed through phases of play. If you think about at the one end, very, very high-powered characters like you see in some anime and things like that, they essentially, they don't need an army. They're a one-man army. They don't need a kingdom. It would be irrelevant to them. Or if you think about some of the aspects you saw in 3.5 with scry and die tactics, where you just scry where the enemy is located, you teleport there while you're invisible, and you kill them and you leave. So I actually had the benefit of running both ACKS and 3.5 in my campaign world. And so I was able to kind of see in real time, because I was running the campaign simultaneously, exactly where magic would really break the phases in 3.5. And I used that when I was doing ACKS 2 to make sure that those spells that I thought were pushing it a little too far were dialed back. A great example is Commune. In the Arn Empire campaign setting, which is just like the default setting for the game, there's this whole notion that the Tarchon has been lost out fighting in the West, and no one knows, is he dead or alive? And if you're just running 3.5 or second edition or first edition or BX, You just cast commune, you get a yes, no from God. He's like, is the Tarkhan alive? Well, okay, well, that just basically kills the whole thing, right? So now we don't have a succession crisis. He's either alive or dead. Who, is Bob the proper heir? All right, there it is. So you have to take those things into account. You can't really have a succession crisis if you can just do it with magic. So that was really took the lion's share of the effort. Another classic example I use is like Fireball. Turns out the difference between a 10-foot radius Fireball and a 20-foot radius Fireball is the difference in whether or not it makes sense to have mass troops or not. A 10-foot radius Fireball, given the number of mages on the battlefield, basically it still makes sense to have massed formations of troops. It's just like Napoleonic cannon fire. But if you take it up to 20-foot radius, turns out, you wipe out 4 times as many troops with every shot. And now it just doesn't make sense. And you get essentially modern warfare, not ancient warfare. Stuff like that. So that was very, very, very hard. The other aspect was figuring out what to do with all that gold. And third, how to make sure that people could level up from downtime activities like running their domain without leveling up forever from downtime activities. And I think that last one was really the secret sauce of ACKS, which was the idea that there's a GP threshold that you have to meet each month in your downtime activities that goes up as you level. And if you don't meet that GP threshold, you don't get any downtime XP, any campaign activity XP. And so that creates a situation where, let's say at first level, you get a domain, and then, by running that domain, you're able to get up to 3rd level, but now the domain is not big enough to help you level anymore. So what do? Well, now you can either go adventure to level up, or you can go conquer somebody else's domain, make your domain bigger, or you can go out into the woods and clear land and fight off enemies and make your domain bigger. And so it creates a situation where the adventuring, the conquering, and the kingship all become integrated. And that's really the secret sauce of the system.
That's very interesting. So my next question for you is, are you on the Gamers for Harris list of people? I don't know if you've heard about this.
I've heard about it.
Yeah. And if you're not, why are you an extreme alt-right MAGA chud?
Ha! All right. Well, first off,
those are the only 2 options, right? That's how they phrased it.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. So no, I'm not on the list. Even if I supported Harris, I would not be on the list. I do not associate my identity as a gamer as a partisan identity. Now, I absolutely have an aspect of my life where I'm very political. I have a separate blog where I write about political issues that matter to me. But the idea that somehow I should use my platform as a game designer to make a statement about partisan American politics, I just disagree with it. I don't do it. Half my audience isn't even American. So why would they care what my view is? Why should I say, oh, you percentage of people somehow I'm going to make a big statement about it? I think we would all be a lot healthier if folks didn't do that. So that said, obviously I'm a right winger. This is well known. So I'm not supporting Harris. I'll be voting for voting for Mr. Trump. But I just don't see a need in my games or my my game studio to make an issue of it. And I kind of wish other people wouldn't, whatever side they're on. So
yeah, it was especially ridiculous this time. I've just, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, I've just did a video a little while ago about the Gamers for Harris list. And this is, of course, the 3rd time they've done it. They did it.
Yeah.
Gamers for her in 2016 and Gamers for Biden, I think it was in 2020. And every time it's this hyper partisan thing, but it's also a kind of a it's a ideological loyalty test, right?
Yep.
Especially for people who are like, they're a lot of the people on that list are people who are connected to some of the bigger gaming companies, and the implication is if you don't sign on that list, then there's going to be trouble, And I know for a fact, and I know some people on that list who are secretly not really Democrats, right?
Right.
and who have just who know that because if they don't do this, it's going to hurt their career. So they do stuff like that. And other people have said the same thing. I just saw John Delarose. I was the one that broke the I think I put out the first video about this, but after that, other people have done it too. And John Delarose did one, and he said he named a couple of people that he knows for a fact are Republicans or conservatives. He called them out. I make a point because I have a lot of people that are semi well-known or well-known in the RPG hobby that have, spoken to me in secret and sometimes given me some information and stuff like that. And I'm not going to burn my sources, but yeah, it's a fact, right? So it is an ideological loyalty test that they've set up there.
Right.
Disgusting.
That sort of behavior is what actually empowers the cancel culture to get away with it, right? Like when I got canceled, it didn't bother me so much that such and such person who was very far left wing wasn't going to buy my game. They were probably not buying my game about Adventure Conqueror King anyway. But what really hurt was when guys that were my friends who I knew shared my political views would unfollow me on Twitter and say, "Sorry, man, I can't, I can't be seen to endorse you." And it's that to me is a lack of personal integrity. Like, believe what you want, but believe it, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, I do think that this is happening a lot less now than it was, 4 or 6 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
That it is starting to the grip is starting to loosen quite a lot. So that's positive at least.
I agree.
And I just the list is. Some people point out that the list is useful for conservative gamers to know who hates them. And for me, mainly that list is going to be a nice way for me to get in touch and offer my condolences in just after the election. At least I've seen
you're a savage, man.
I am. Yeah, I did that in 2016 too. It was fantastic. It was I spent I think 24 hours just tweeting people who are virulently anti-Trump and saying, "Hey, sorry you lost." But what was I going to say? I've been looking. I have some connections, let's say, and the internal polling is looking pretty clear at this point, and you can tell because like CNN and Saturday Night Live and some of these elements of the mainstream media that a couple of weeks ago were treating Kamala like she was the second coming are now suddenly being very critical because they don't want after the election to look like they were idiots. Now, there are some that are still just going on with it, right? Like MSNBC, I think, is still basically hero worshiping her, but it's not looking good for them. What was I was gonna say something else about this. No, I've forgotten now. So I've got a question here from Adino the Esnite. He says, question for Alex, any plans to update existing supplementary books like Capital of the Borderlands?
Yeah, I'd really like to bring them all updated to 2nd edition. What I haven't decided is what's the best way to do that. One thought I had was to take all of the ACKS series and consolidate it into either a box set or a book where, you would just buy one product and you'd have everything you need to run in the Iron Empire Borderlands campaign setting. Or perhaps combine it with an expanded Iron Empire primer or something like that. Another thought is just, book by book, just go through them and update them. So haven't decided, still kind of in communication with the fans about what the best thing to do there is. I spend a lot of time on Discord just asking people like, hey, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this idea? So we'll see, but certainly I will eventually get them updated one way or another. The ACKS are lower priority because they are still really compatible. There's a few that are less compatible that need to be more radically updated.
I now remembered what I was going to say, that I did a short as an addendum to my video about Gamers for Harris, because one of the names on that list was somebody who worked for Trollord. And I wanted to point out, and just in case somebody didn't see that short or hasn't been aware of this, because there were a lot of people that are really disappointed to see, Trollord Games there in in that list because they tend to be very neutral. And they have now removed that person's name. They didn't know. It was like their social media manager, and they basically told her to get off the list because they want to stay politically neutral. Which brings us to this question here by Isaac Marks. Do you support a designer Trump supporters list? I don't, frankly, because I don't see that there's a necessity for that. I'll say, first of all, that you know, when Alex was talking earlier about how, you know, like there are probably a lot of left-wing people wouldn't buy his products anyways. I know a lot of people who are left-wing. I have gamers in my gaming groups who are very left-wing, but they just don't go with cancel culture, you know, and they and really when it comes to gaming, they don't want their gaming to be political. I don't want gaming to be political, right? I don't want my games aren't right-wing games. My games are RPGs that are, you know, in terms of contemporary politics, totally neutral. They're mostly about like historical settings or really weird Gonzo science fantasy settings. So they and I don't, you know, there's no political propaganda element to the games that I make. You know, like I guess the closest thing that there would be to that I've made to a game that has some political aspect to is the Invisible College, which in some ways is kind of a defense of classical the classical Enlightenment values, you know. But that's as close as it gets, and that's still contextually relevant to the setting, you know.
That's your best game, by the way. You
like it a lot.
You should be leaning on that IP, frickin' like it's a Porsche 911 and speeding as fast as you can, man. TV shows, comics, books, it's fantastic.
I think it would probably do pretty well for some of that, but unfortunately, you know, it's the reach is hard to get these days, and
it is.
And also, it proved to me something. Like, I mean, I think out of every game that I've made, like almost all my games are to some degree labors of love, right? But Invisible College was kind of a particular game that I did because I really wanted to run that kind of campaign in an OSR system, and I wasn't too worried about, you know, like, if it's gonna be a super hit or something. And but it certainly proved to me that like there are tiers of success in terms of genres of RPGs, right? Like fantasy, you know, all my best-selling games are like the historically authentic fantasy games, right? And then kind of weirder Gonzo gaming is a little bit less appealing than that. Star Adventure, which is my like space opera game, it's a small product, but it's done really well. So science fiction, you know, like traditional science fiction is pretty popular. But once you get outside of those into like slightly weirder stuff, the sales aren't going to be quite as big. But, you know, I love Invisible College, and I'm glad, for example, that the Red Room did a crossover in one of their products with it. And I would love to see more stuff happening with it. But, you know, I also have to put priority on the games that have already been big successes.
Yeah, I could see why Invisible College wouldn't be as big an RPG, but like in terms of,
it's more niche.
But if you think about like a Netflix TV show, for instance, you know,
I gotta try to get a Netflix deal for it.
You know, or like
it's wild, right? It's a modern magic setting that combines elements of like conspiracies and security agencies, like spy stuff. You know,
and you've got everything, right? You've got like the Black Lodge, you've got the Nazi guys in there. You know, you've got like the opportunity for the hero. You know, one of the heroes is going to go to try to become an initiate, and he's going to fail and join the baddies. Like I was reading it, and I was like, get me Michael Crichton right now, because we found the next IP.
Well, if you know anyone in Hollywood, let me know.
I used to.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on now. So somebody brought up in the chat there, Arbiter of Worlds, and I'd had someone. I'll start with the comment from from the person who just mentioned it. Frank Estrosa says, "I bought Arbiter of Worlds. What is the most important lesson I should learn from that book?"
Great question. So I wrote Arbiter of Worlds because I wanted to lay out a theoretical basis for RPGs that was in opposition to the dominant Forge theory. And actually, I discovered RPGPundit because of his very important work in fighting back against the Forge back during the, I think you called them the Swine Wars or some such like that.
Yes, that's right.
It was just hilarious. Like, and you would do these amazing lambasting essays and then end them with like what you were smoking as you wrote it. It was great. So that's how I discovered you. So, and in the book, I lay out my own theory of RPGs, and everything else in the book kind of follows from it. And even if you disagree with my theory, like certainly there's still some things of value there. But to me, the key that RPGs have that no other product can do is they can give you agency in a secondary world. And why does that matter? Well, very few people get to experience very much agency in the real world. Most of us are very tightly constrained. And even those of us who do experience a lot of agency, if we're smart, and most of us are because we're gamers, experience opportunity costs. Like if I decide to become a doctor, then that means I don't get to be a lawyer because I've chosen one thing over the other. And so every choice that we make in terms of our sense of agency comes with this existential cost. And this has been studied. Like, it's actually quite interesting. I talk about this in the book a little bit, but like high IQ people are the only people in the world to suffer existential depression, which is, the depression of all the choices you could have made but weren't able to make because you only got to make one choice. And so RPGs are a refuge from that. They provide this opportunity to have total agency in a secondary world. But for the agency to matter, the world has to matter. And so for the world has to matter, then it has to be a world where you're not just fudging it. And it has to be a world where you're not just arbitrarily at the whim of, Bob had a bad day, so everybody dies. Or Bob likes you because you're his girlfriend, so you get to have better hit points or whatever. And so essentially it flows from that. So that would be my key takeaway from the book. If you take away one thing, it's that if you destroy the sense of agency in a secondary world, you've destroyed the value of RPGs. If you can provide that sense of agency, everything else will be secondary. Like whether you can do the best funny voices doesn't matter as much. Whether you have the most creative world building skills doesn't matter as much. But if you can make a player feel like, wow, I was in this secondary world and I did things that mattered, then you've succeeded, full stop.
Yeah. And that's an aspect of the importance of having a living world, right? A world that is emulative to the point that it feels like a living world, and to the experience of immersion, right? Where you end up experiencing the character as a living character.
Exactly.
So I had someone else who sent me in even before we started a question also from Arbiter of Worlds, and he asks, what's your most unusual or controversial GMing advice from that book?
Oh gosh. So the one that definitely is the most controversial is, I said, it's not your job to make sure everyone has fun. That one line in that book has led to more controversy than anything else, but I think it's really important.
I've said the exact same thing in my blogging and on several occasions.
Yeah, people go crazy. Right. When I was younger, I took it as it was my job, right? And so if someone didn't have fun, then somehow I had failed as a GM. But first off, you're not God, and you're not their therapist, and you're not their spouse, right? Like if my buddy Bob had a bad day at work and is worried about his divorce, that proceedings, and he, isn't able to have a positive vibe, like I'm not doing anyone a service by acting like a clown to try and entertain him during the D&D session, right? That's not my job. That's not why people are there. Most of us are not good at being clowns or therapists. So what I say is that it's your job to make sure that people could have fun. You're like a party host. You're not a clown. You're not an entertainer. You are creating an environment in which people can actualize the type of fun that RPGs can provide. And the type of fun that they can best provide is the experience of agency in a secondary world. And and that has provoked tons of comments on my YouTube channel, tons of tweets. That's the second most controversial is never fudge a meaningful die roll. And people get really upset about that. What's interesting is that players almost never get upset about that comment. I've never had a player come to me and say, I wish my GM fudged. But GMs who fudge really get upset about it. which I think kind of tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah. What was I going to say here? Frank Destroso says, thank you for asking the question, Pundit, and a great answer. Very much in line with what I learned from Pundit himself. Looking forward to reading the book. All right.
Yeah, I would say Pundit and I are very much of like mind with regard to deep respect for history, deep antipathy to the sort of forge-minded story game approach. The Venn diagram of the two of us definitely has substantial overlap.
Yeah, I think so too, for sure. Just see if there's anything else. I know several people talking about Invisible College.
Man, we're gonna make it happen, right? We got to get Elon in on this. Like, he can be a character in it. It's gonna be awesome.
So my next question. Well, before I get on to my next question, because now we've gotten up to about 77, 80 people watching. So I'll mention again, just for the sake of Venger's promotion, that once again, if anyone who gives a $5 or higher super chat, besides being able to donate to Meatball's Tuna Fund, will also be able to receive from Venger Satanis a copy of the Shadow Chalt PDF for anyone who gives $5 or more in the super chat tonight. He said you just have to send him your drive-through email address, and he'll send you the PDF. And as Diversity and Dragons just pointed out, hit the thumbs up, fellas. Please do like the live stream. And obviously, if any of you are coming in here from promotion that Alex did, check out my channel and subscribe if you like the gist of my videos. We're very lo-fi here. I don't have high production values, and yet somehow I've managed to get a good audience, and that's one of the most important things for any game designers to have loyal fans, which makes a big difference.
We actually studied that at Defy Media, and it turns out that there was like a two axes of production value and authenticity, and depending on the type of content, you could actually hurt your authenticity by having too good a production value. And so they would actually find like, oh, we got a new set and we got these new cameras and everything, and then they would actually find it went down in traffic because people kind of missed the sense that they were just talking to a real person who wasn't overproduced. So
yeah, well, there's no fear of that from me, but
right.
No, I know what that means, right? Because there are some YouTubers that start out like pretty simple, and then they get they put way too much bells and whistles and lights and intros and all kinds of stuff. Not that every intro is bad, right? But or anything like that. But I think so too. And of course, I'm saying that in part with a very strong bias, which is that I'm a complete technical illiterate, so I wouldn't know how to do any of this stuff anyway. So it's not like I have much of a choice, but I've decided to try to go as hard as I can on authenticity to make up for it. Death Angel Shadow says Meatball needs tuna badly. Yes. Let me see here. Okay, before I go on to my next question, which might be a little controversial, here's one from Isaac Marks. What do you recommend for people coming from 5e-like narratives to get into simulationism and non-culturally generic settings?
So the technique I've used has been to reset their expectations with reference to media that they might be more familiar with. So back when Game of Thrones was popular, I would use Game of Thrones as a point of reference. I might use Rome or Sparta for Spartacus for ACKS. But basically, you want to say, look, this is the sort of game where we're really going to be immersed in this historical framework where the morality is going to be different from the morality of our world today. And that's okay. We're not trying to simulate 21st century America or 21st century Canada. And also this world it's going to have aspects that are going to be brutal and are going to be raw, but it's that brutality and that rawness that creates the opportunity for heroism. And so I, as your GM, I'm going to be rolling dice in the open. So you're going to see transparently what befalls. You're never going to wonder, am I fudging the dice? Because you're going to see the die rolls yourself. And we're gonna go on this adventure together, and I don't have some pre-planned destination that we're gonna try and get to. You're gonna have a lot of agency, and most people are like, okay, I get that. I'm willing to give that a try. And that's worked pretty well for me. I've probably introduced, I don't know, 20 people from sort of new school play to old school play that way.
That's pretty good. I've always kind of I know that there are a few people who came from 5th edition that then somehow found Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire or whatever and got really into it. But I don't set out in my products to try to specifically target that audience. But it's always nice when that happens.
Absolutely.
Here, subbing to Driving and Dragons also helps the algorithm. Well, Driving and Dragons, our first 2 shows so far have been with people that are fairly well known, Mr. Welch and now Archon. But I do want to put in some of the episodes of the RPG Pundit Encounter interviews with smaller YouTubers or smaller publishers. So if you're a smaller publisher or a smaller YouTuber, you can try to make your pitch for being on one of my shows as a guest. So all right, my next question, it has to do with a tweet that you made not too long ago, a bit longer ago than it would have been in episode 1, but
Sure.
but if we hadn't failed at being able to get it together. But you had made a comment on Twitter, or X, whatever we want to call it, a little while ago, pointing out that the OSR is now basically 20 years old and that it would be time to change it, like to replace it with something else, right?
Right.
And I wanted to know what did you mean by that, first of all, and then I'm sure I'll have follow-up questions.
Sure. Well, it is a little bit of a wry comment, but the old school Renaissance has now existed for longer than the classical period, which it claims to be the Renaissance of, right? Like, ancient Greco-Roman civilization existed from, say, roughly 400 BC to, call it 450 or so AD, right? So it's like an 850-year period. And then we had 1 century was the neoclassical, the neoclassical period, or the Renaissance was maybe 2 centuries. So it was like 25% of the length. And then we moved on to do other things. We had an Enlightenment after the Renaissance, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, the OSR is now actually occupies a longer linear period of years than the original old school movement did. I mean, it was like from original D&D to 2nd edition was maybe a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought maybe it's time to start to think about that. We should be seeing ourselves as actually at this point the larger movement, and what do we build on what we've learned as this generation, because we've had more opportunity for lessons learned than they did at this point, in addition to being able to build off them. Unfortunately, my effort failed because I couldn't think of a good acronym. All of my efforts have gone to naught for failure to have a cool acronym. So there's a group on the Pedantic server that was trying to say it should be called Fantasy Adventure Gaming, but that one flopped for obvious reasons.
Well, besides the acronym, it's also like, it's an extremely generic idea, right? Like I don't see how fantasy adventure gaming really defines anything.
Yeah, so they've switched over to classic adventure gaming is the name for their movement now, and so and their opinion is, so that way it's not a renaissance. They see it as just a continuity, right? It's just, Gary was the Greeks, they're the Romans, but it's a continuity as compared to a renaissance, which is interesting.
Well, I think sorry, go ahead.
I kept trying to go with something like simulation based, like simulationist adventure gaming environment or whatever. But as I said, I haven't come up with a good one.
Well, that in itself would kind of bring in some confusion with kind of forge theory stuff. Somebody here recently asked here, like, what is forge-based design? And if you don't mind, I'll just quickly answer that, which is to say that the forge was a design movement that came up in the early 2000s. It was started by Ron Edwards, aka Professor Bat Penis. It was essentially based on, first of all, on the principle that Dungeons and Dragons and RPG play in general, which is all basically derived from Dungeons and Dragons, is fundamentally flawed. It creates an experience that does not match the experience that Edwards claimed that gamers actually want. He defined D&D as an incoherent game because it has it has several different priorities of play that he says are therefore incompatible because people will want different things. And his solution to that was to create a set of different categories of design, one of which is simulationism, one of which is gamism, and the other one is narrativism, that emphasize different things. And his theory was that if you make a game that focuses on only one of those three categories, and therefore is pure in some sense, it'll be much more successful for the type of people like that style of game, and that every person has to have each one of those styles. And that there are certain things that RPG play promises that doesn't fit into any of those styles because they're not real, right? He did not believe that the emulation of a genre is a real thing, that it can only be substituted within like the gamist game mechanics or the narrativist story gaming, and simulationism we kind of just put on one side there because he didn't care very much about it, and that the idea of immersion was just a fantasy, right? Which tells me that he's never actually run a successful RPG game. And so basically the thing is that the Forge theory never managed to create games that were actually successful. And when 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons adopted this idea and essentially turned D&D in 4th edition into a gamist game, I had predicted that they were going to lose 2/3 of their audience, which is exactly what happened. And that's part of why I was hired on to be one of the main consultants of 5th edition, because Professor Bat Penis was wrong and I was right. So that's the essence of Forge-based design, right? And as far as the idea of having to, well, first of all, the way that what you had commented in the way you suggested it in the Twitter, in your original tweet, let's say, I know that it led certain factions, because there has been now a strong anti-OSR faction. There's been one for a long time on the left, whose argument is, oh, the OSR is toxic and it's racist and sexist and homophobic and all this. Right. But now there's another one on the right, which is the Bro-SR crowd, which are essentially fundamentalists of only playing original rules as written in theory, though in fact rules as defined by the leaders of that movement, or the leader of that movement, who essentially despise the OSR because they feel like it's just creating deviations from the one true pure perfect game, right? So I think that there were probably several Bro-SR people who were cheering that comment, though the way you described what your intention was now, it had very little to do with like their idea of that the OSR should be destroyed, right? Right.
Well, now, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, the OSR, the thing about it though is that it's been evolving over 20 years. It hasn't stayed the same at all, right? Like the OSR started as a revival, which is sometimes is called the old school revival, right? It started with the copies of the clones of older editions of D&D and adventures and modules that would have fit into that same mold. And then, the second wave of the OSR happened, starting mainly, I think, with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and Adventure Conqueror King wasn't that much later to that. And, these were games that did not match any old edition, but rather introduced new variations on the D&D structure. And then there's been a third wave of OSR design that focuses on highly genre or setting specific gaming, right? Like you have, obviously most of my games fit into that, and there's other products like Yoon Suin and which other ones can I think of? there are quite a few, but it's they're
there's a number,
escaping
sure.
my mind at the moment. But games that are essentially set up, well, like Operation White Box, right, which is Dungeons and Dragons rules where you're playing commandos in World War II, right, and stuff like that. So it went from a revival of saying let's just rebuild the original ideas to a renaissance, in the sense, much like the Renaissance wasn't just a copy of the classics of the classic context, but was something that started with that and then became its own thing, right? And I'd point out that I did a video about this recently. There's a lot of statistical evidence, particularly when you look at Kickstarters and things like that, that the OSR in the last 5 years has been steadily growing and is actually more popular now than it ever was. So from my point of view, the OSR as a design school is a huge success, and it's kind of, the free market seems to dictate that it should continue to exist, that there isn't really a need to try to redefine it in some other way, because it's actually doing better now than it was at any time in the past.
I would say products that call themselves OSR are doing well, but I don't know that it's because they call themselves OSR. A lot of things call themselves OSR these days that I would not personally consider relevant to my interests, let's say.
That's true, and there are quite a few products that call themselves OSR that aren't, because the OSR being a design school, the nature of that school is that you have this box, right? And the box is the classic D&D mechanics. And if you don't play within that box, you're not OSR anymore. There are a lot of games that have gone outside of that box but say, oh, well, we're OSR inspired or stuff like this. Right? And that's like what happens when you have a really successful movement and there are people desperate to latch onto it to make more money, right? So in a sense, that's a sign of its success, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from the get-go, the OSR was actually sort of two different movements. There was one movement was a reaction to third edition. And it was said, wow, third edition has become really overly complex. There's too many splat books. It's too much work. It's too much prep time. I want to go back to the old school way of playing when I just needed my red box and it was, it was rules light, blah, 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 blah. And then there was a second school, and I put myself in this school, which was a reaction to fourth edition, and said, wow, I really don't like how they've turned this game, how they've turned Dungeons and Dragons into this weird gamist phenomenon that may as well just be a turn-based board game, and where all of the rules are disassociated from the fantasy worlds. And that was what ACKS was a reaction to. And so that segment of the OSR really has no issue with complexity. It likes rules. It likes game mechanics. I would put Kevin Crawford in that school. And whereas the prior school does not like rules per se. They're the ones that think rules get in the way. You should just have rulings. And that trend, if you follow that trend, it eventually leads you to, Black Hack and some of these other very rules light neo SR.
What you could almost call the new OSR, or something
new
like
OSR,
that.
Yeah. So
and new OSR.
Yeah, which is so why I kind of put my tent pole in that I'm a simulationist, and I kind of planted that flag. And it's because to me, what I want ultimately is a game that will let me simulate or emulate a world in the genre that I'm wanting to be in. And I think you really understand the importance of catering the rules to the genre outcome that you want.
Very important.
Yeah, and I think, but like for the rules light crowd, that isn't as interesting to them. And they have a very different philosophy that I don't really consider myself part of. So that was a little bit in my head when I was saying, like, I don't personally think OSR as a term is as useful anymore.
Well, I think that there are different, there are different sub branches within the OSR. Some of which, like I said, if you get some game that like brings in stuff from, 90s mechanics or story games or things like that, you could say that's not really OSR at all. But then there are some that, like you say, there are some very rules light OSR games that focus a lot on the DM controlling the play and not worrying too much about mechanics. And that's not really my style either, right? Like on the contrary, I would say The OSR games that I like are ones that are very easily set up to be sandboxes where the DM controls almost nothing, except for tweaking results on random tables or things like that, right? Which is my Sword and Caravan game, my Baptism of Fire game. When I run them, or when anybody else runs them who uses the back end of the book with all of its various generators, I never know what's going to happen in any session because I don't have to prepare planning anything. I just have to use the appropriate tables of where the player characters decide to go, right? And that's what I like more. But I do still think, because it is a design school, that there is room for that other point of view, and that there are some people that prefer that style, and I guess that's okay, as long as they're not, going outside of the box of old school design. So we got a super chat here, $5 super chat from Climbing That Mountain. He said, I rolled a $3 super chat, but I'm fudging my roll. Thank you for that. I guess I will pass on your name to Avengers Satanis. Question for Pundit. Who has a higher IQ, you or Alex? Joe the lawyer, next guest. Joe SR, great show. I have no idea which of us has a higher IQ. I'm not a big believer in the idea that IQ by itself is a very good measure of intelligence, certainly not of education, absolutely not of wisdom. I do know my IQ, and it is pretty high, but I don't really consider that to be something that is a big qualification of my intellectual ability by itself. I mean, I'm sure that if I didn't have a relatively high IQ, I might not be able to have the level of education that I did. But I know a lot of people with high IQ that are complete idiots. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Alex.
Oh, I would just say we probably both have intelligence 18 and leave it at that. It's not really worth trying to
That's a great answer.
trying to figure it out beyond that. I think once, it's like kind of height in basketball. Once you get tall enough, the gain thereafter becomes diminished relative to the advantage of things like conscientiousness, putting in the practice time, where what your focus is, etc. I've known a few guys that have an IQ that is so high that they're basically from outer space.
No, I mean, actually, that's a very good point, because I mean, once you get to a certain level of IQ, it becomes debilitating. Right.
Yeah,
exactly. There's this sweet spot which I'm happy to be in. Right. That if I had 10 more points of IQ than I have, I'd probably be a basket case. Right. Because most people that get to that point, they just can't function in regular society. The same way that somebody who has an 80 IQ can't really function in regular society for the opposite problem. Right. You don't want to be there.
That's right.
I've met a lot of people who are high IQ and have and basically know nothing except for a few tiny obsessions that they might have. I've also met people who've had like huge levels of more education than me. Right, I don't have a doctorate, for example. I've met lots of people with doctorates who are complete idiots. Right, like they have no clue. And one of the things people underestimate in the kind of measure of overall meaningful intelligence is somebody's experiences and the range of experiences that they've had, right? Like the ancients used to say that nobody can really call themselves wise if they haven't traveled,
Right.
And there's real wisdom in that, right? Because if you've always stayed inside the same social class, right? I come from a fairly upper class background, and you notice there are other people like this too, like Tucker Carlson, for example, came from a very upper class background. And certain other people too, Ezra Levant, guys like this. It came from very good backgrounds, and for whatever reason ended up kind of shifting out of that bubble. And everybody who's in that bubble, you look at them and you end up despising them. Right? Like they're just morons, for the most part. This is the managerial class that is running our civilization today. And they have no idea about anything outside of their immediate, 4-block radius or something like that. It's just horrifying.
Yep. I went to school with a lot of folks like that. Yeah, for sure.
And then you have other cases, people who, I don't know, like J.D. Vance, right, were born in like abject poverty and are incredibly educated people.
Right. Right.
And it's a product of it, obviously a basic intellect, sure, but also the willingness to educate yourself formally or informally, and the willingness to look into a wide variety of life experiences, not sticking in your own little sphere,
That's right. Right.
All right. Let me see if there's any other comments that I want to point out here before we go on with the next question.
Actually, can I speak to this one that Isaac Marks has here? This
Sure.
is near and dear to my heart. So he says Ron Edwards is basically a philosophical anti-realist. So I made this comment on Twitter the other day, which is that if you don't believe that there's any such thing as objective reality, if you believe that truth is just a narrative and everything is a social construct, then by definition, you can't actually be a simulationist game designer or simulationist role-playing gamer, because there's nothing for you to simulate. And so there is this very weird philosophical alignment between simulationism and certain schools of epistemology that right now are kind of tending to lean right, and with narrativism and certain schools of philosophy that are right now leaning left. And it's actually really remarkable. And so, yes, I would agree with you, Isaac, that Ron Edwards is a philosophical anti-realist. And he never came out and said that, but if you follow the thinking deeply enough, that is absolutely where you end up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great point.
All right. I agree, by the way. Let's see here. I'm just trying to catch up with there's a lot of comments here right now.
You savaged Ron Edwards so much. I'm certain that guy like wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, shouting your name. Like I'm convinced.
And the really funny thing is Ron Edwards a few years ago, he suddenly like showed up again after when the Forge died. He kind of went undercover, and then like years later he comes out and he's like, yeah, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I've always loved Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to do OSR stuff. And I immediately jumped in there and go, no, motherfucker, you're not going to be allowed to memory hole what you have done, right? And I basically drove him out again. So that was a short-lived attempted revival on his part.
It would have been different.
When these guys crawls out from under the rock, I'm going to do the same.
It would have been different if he'd come forth and said, I was wrong, right? Like the atheist who finds Christianity. That's different. Exactly.
I will forgive someone who has a road to Damascus moment, right? But if you come in and pretend that you were always the biggest fan of D&D because now you want to make money off the OSR, forget it.
Exactly.
All right. So I think I'm going to go on to the next question here.
All right.
I've caught up on the comments. I didn't see any other specific questions. So what do you think right now in 2024 is the biggest issue in the hobby?
Oh, that's a great question. So if I had one complaint about the hobby, it would be that I think game design is actually not taken very seriously. And I know that's a strange thing to say in a hobby where we all play a lot of games, but there are a large number of games which end up quite successful that they are literally badly designed. They do not accomplish what they claim to accomplish, and you have to work around their mechanics in order to have fun rather than work with their mechanics. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the major reasons is that role-playing games have network effects. And we all know that when network effects come into play, that the size of the network drives out all other factors, so that the inferior product in terms of product features and capabilities can often lose out relative to the product that just happens to have the bigger network. And RPGs are much more driven by network effects than by anything else. And so you get a result where if you had
can I just interrupt you 1 second? Perfect example. You were talking about Invisible College, right? Invisible College is very carefully designed on OSR lines, and it's still, I think, just an Electrum bestseller on drive-through. And the Cthulhu game that Matt Mercer and the Critical Role people did that is literally unplayable has been a massive success, right? So that's an example of the networking obviously is going to get them a ton of sales of a game that probably hardly anyone will actually play because they literally can't in this case.
Exactly. And so it's a sad point, but if you were an investor and you said to the investor, listen, you can have two choices, right? You can have a badly designed game endorsed by the top 10 YouTubers, or you can have the absolute magnum opus of RPGPundit and Archon teaming up. Like, the investors can be like, sorry guys, you'll do a really nice game design, but I'm going to actually go with the YouTubers, and he'll make
I'll
a
go
lot
with
of money.
Ginny D's new RPG instead. Yeah.
Yep. And that's, I would say, that's my number one complaint. And then, it's frustrating because then a lot of people say, gosh, this hobby isn't as great. It's 15 minutes of fun packed into 2 hours, was like the famous criticism. And they're right, but it doesn't
that was Ron Edwards who said that, right?
Well, he was it? So, okay, he said one right thing in his life. Yeah, he said one right thing in his life then, because that is actually correct for a lot of these games, because they're badly designed. So,
well, I mean, there's no part of his success was that, of course, in the late 90s, there was an absolute cornucopia of badly designed games, right? But games that often had like really interesting premises, but they were like completely unplayable.
Completely unplayable.
That was part
and
of
some of them,
success.
Some of them were even unreadable. Like, do you remember that era of graphic design when you'd like open the page and it would just be like blood stain with like black on red text, and you're like,
it's like, what is it saying?
Yep.
That's very true. Well, I think I agree with you, and I kind of would point out something that's related to this, because you're talking about the networking, is that like we've always had, there've always been better or worse games, some of which got better production values because they spent more money even if they were worse games, right, or whatever. They had more resources to put into it, and sometimes that led them to be successful, especially if they had like a certain concept. Like, World of Darkness is not a very good system, right? But the vampire thing came at just an exact perfect moment for it to become a big hit, and of course it tapped into the goth culture, and so of course it became a hugely successful, badly designed game. But now we have the problem of influencer culture, right? And you see this especially now with Dungeons and Dragons, but also since the OGL scandal, ironically, we're seeing like all of these guys that were clingers to 5th edition, right? Like the influencers that were around 5th edition are suddenly decide, oh, we're going to make our own game, right? Because they're going to try to, otherwise they're going to try to take, demand that we pay them royalties, right? So screw that. I mean, a totally understandable motive for them to do it, but none of them actually know how to design a game, right? Like, so all of these games that they've made, the ones that Critical Roles they made, the NDMX or whatever, the one that the MCDM, Matt Colville's game, all of these are terrible, right? And they're going to be successful because of the internet fame of this. And this is one of the things I've been railing against in the OSR, because there are, of course, some people who are now becoming kind of OSR influencers, including people who have like channels, and not everybody's bad, right? Like, I'm not saying that all of the influencers in the OSR who don't actually design games are bad. We've got an example of Diversity and Dragons. His work is excellent as a YouTuber, but we have people that are getting on from the point of view of being influencers, and that they end up having that influence on the OSR that shifts it away from being a pure design school. Because for a long time in the OSR, if you could have a product that often didn't necessarily have very high production values, but that certainly not to compete with Wizards or something like that. So you get something like the original Stars Without Number, right? Not a bad cover, but it didn't have very much art.
Exactly.
Huge success because it was an excellent design, right? And so are all of Kevin Crawford's later works, right? But now you have this element, and it's one thing when you have these YouTubers that are not necessarily focused on the OSR as a design school, pushing certain ideas or certain products over others. But it's worse if you have people, starting to replace this idea of the OSR as a design school into a community of influential figures, right? Because there it becomes very dangerous that you're going to end up losing the one quality that has maintained the success of the OSR, which is its quality as a design school.
That's right.
But that also that expands into gaming in general, that pretty soon, like, I don't know, if you had like someone who is a very successful YouTuber or Twitch streamer or whatever, that, you know, probably didn't play D&D at all until like 6 months ago, like, you know, Ginny
Yep.
E famously started that way. They're going to start making products, and those products are going to be crap products that are going to end up in the long run diluting the hobby. You know.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I think we are seeing similar examples happening right now in video games, like the sheer amount of bad video games that are coming out with, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars being squandered because people that aren't good video game designers are being put in charge of these projects, and it's
and that's before you even get into the woke stuff, right?
Before
like,
you even get into that stuff. It's just
Yeah.
So, but it is what it is. All we can really do is do what you've done, honestly, to your credit, which is I think you figured this out sooner than most, which is if you're playing in an industry which is controlled by influence and network effects, you have to build your influence in your network. There's no other option. And you figured that out, I think, sooner than most, and have rightly benefited from that.
Yeah,
you know,
it's funny because I had a lot of people that criticize my rampant self-promotion, right?
But no one else is going to do it.
Now are doing exactly the same thing, right? Because they realize
right.
that's how it succeeds. You know.
That's exactly right. That's how you succeed. There's no way around it. It's why I started a YouTube channel. I don't, you know, I myself would prefer to just be locked in a room and just design, but
yeah, of course. But that's an important lesson for anyone who's trying to make a game. So it's not enough to make it, and you might think your game is the most wonderful product that has ever come out in RPGs. Chances are that would be wrong, but let's say it is a good product.
It is,
right?
yeah.
It's not enough to make a good product. You can't just make a product, put it on drive-through, and then hope for the best, right? You have to create a network to be able to get people to know about you, right? And so
that's right.
You probably want to start with stuff like blogging or vlogging, and then, you know, having a social media presence, making smaller products that people can try without a large cost, and then seeing that that's good, right? So then you do the bigger thing and all that sort of thing. It's very important. It's very important to have a diverse variety of products. So like I have the big books like Baptism of Fire, and then I have like the Pundit Files, right, which you can buy for $3.50 at the Red Room store, you know.
Absolutely.
So it makes it very, very practical, right? All right, so we're getting closer towards the end here. I still got another couple of questions for you, but I'll mention again to the audience, if anyone cares to have questions for Alex, they should post them now. And if you do a super chat that's $5 or more just tonight, this is a very special offer by Venture Satanis. Anyone who gives a $5 or higher super chat can get in touch with him, send him their drive-through email address, and he will donate to them a copy of the Shadow Chalt PDF. I haven't seen it, so I'm not saying it's a great product or not. I'm sure it'll be a very Venture-y product, you know, and the Venture products are very particular. You either like them or you don't. But if you do like Venture, this is a great opportunity. So my next question is I've asked you what was the biggest issue in the hobby. If it differs from that, what would be the biggest issue personally to you relating to the work, you know?
Oh gosh. I would say for me, it's the fact that I don't have the full stack of skills. So that is to say, I'm not a particularly good graphic designer to do my own book layouts. And so I end up having to consume a lot of time interacting with the layout artists and the artists to make sure that everything comes out the way I want, because I get kind of Stanley Kubrick about the whole thing. And, you know, and I'm like, no, this table must be formatted with right justification, you know, and so, you know, if I had like the time to just take a year off and absolutely become a master of Affinity, that would probably be like really valuable for me, but I don't have that time. I would say the other issue I wrestle with is that I am right at the point where the amount of customer service and community maintenance that I have to do takes up a lot of time, which then eats into the time I have available to design like the next product. So it creates like this negative momentum of where product support prevents me from creating the next product, which would pay the bills to be able to maintain the existing products that I need to support. And that's a challenge that all entrepreneurs face. It's a scaling issue, and I'm just at that uncomfortable scale where I'm not quite successful enough to be a 2-man company, but I'm a little bit too big to just be a 1-man shop. And they feed into each other, right? Because obviously there are things I could delegate, but then I don't feel like I can delegate them because my Stanley Kubrick side comes out and I start throwing the table over. So, and that's, you know, that's on me, but that's how I would describe like my current problem set.
Well, I guess I've been a little bit lucky in that sense, which is that I don't have the Stanley Kubrick problem. So, you know, I don't publish any of my stuff. I always get a publisher to partner with. And usually I leave them to do all the, like, I usually find a guy who I've seen has done very nice work, right? And then I say, okay, you go ahead. And usually they produce something that I'm very happy with, right? Relating to production, do you have a position personally on AI art?
Oh yeah, sure.
Do you use it in your books?
So I think AI art is fine. I think it's going to get used more and more in the future. I think it's a competitive advantage for small developers who don't have access to the sort of budget that Wizards of the Coast or Call of Cthulhu or Chaosium or guys like that have. You know, since I did have the budget, so for ACKS 2, actually is the largest art budget I've ever had for any series of books I've done. The art team is something like 20 different artists from around the world, and I spent a ton of cash to make sure, you know, we had a ton of really amazing art. That said, you know, there were a few places where it was like, you know, I need an image here. The book is already late. I've already got 20 artists working, and we're just not going to get it done in time. So we're going to use some AI filler art, and it's fine. I don't lose any sleep over it. So I know that there are a lot of people who are, you know, genuinely feeling like their careers are endangered by AI art, and I certainly have sympathy for that. You know, I mean, one of my greatest talents is writing, and I can see that writing is just becoming increasingly devalued, economically speaking. Like, I feel bad for anyone who used to make their living as a copywriter, you know, or copy editor or translator.
Online journalists, you know,
online journalists, right?
Unless you can do something very special, but like the guys that used to be like writing articles for, you know, for the Escapist or something like that, you know, that's not
random news.
Happening.
It's just, yeah, it's you can see it. It's simply just gonna really be troubled. And, you know, maybe there'll be some regulation for that. Maybe there won't. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but all I can do is say that I do the best I can to make sure the people I work with are treated really fairly. If I have the budget for it, I'm happy to pay generously for really good art. But you know, if it's a smaller project where I don't have the budget for it, you know, like some of my Axioms fanzines or whatever that I've done, I've used AI art and haven't lost any sleep about it. So other people draw the line in different places, you know, and wherever anyone wants to draw the line, I respect, and I'm really transparent about my views so that people know how I think about it.
So my traditional final question, or what I plan to make my trick, this is only the second episode, but it's going to be the question I ask everybody. It was going to be essentially, how nerdy are you? Because I'm on a quest to see if there's anybody else that's like me, right? Where I basically, the only really nerdy thing I do is play RPGs, right? I don't play video games. I don't really play board games, you know, like I mean, I play regular board games, but I don't play like those complex, you know, hobby board games or something like that. I don't collect comics. I don't have Funko Pops. I don't watch anime, you know, none of that stuff. And I've been looking to see if there's anybody else who is like this, right? That is, but I already know the answer for you is going to be no, because I know that you know, with the Escapist and everything else, and you're clearly a video game guy, so you know, like that's all. So that's kind of, I'm not even gonna bother for to ask.
No, ask it. I want to be part of the movement, man. You can't make it a tradition and then exclude me from the tradition. I'm outraged. All right. No, so I would say I am, in my day, I was very nerdy, but compared to nowadays, I think I'm less nerdy. So I don't really watch very much anime. I actually play very few video games anymore because I tend to feel like the time I spend on video games is time I could be spending working on Autark. So I don't collect comic books anymore. I used to be an avid collector of comic books, but I don't anymore because for the most part, I don't like what's being created. I used to go see all of the movies on opening night. You know, I was there for opening night of Phantom Menace and so on. I don't do that anymore because I don't like the movies that are being created. I used to read all of the
I
books that
think
were
also
written.
it's not really nerdy anymore to like going to watch a Marvel movie doesn't really count as nerdy. Everybody does it.
Yeah.
It's only nerdy if that's the only stuff you go to watch, or if you go to watch
Yeah.
obsessively everything that comes out that's
Right.
like science fiction
Right.
fantasy, right?
So
Which I never did.
I definitely like board games. I definitely like miniature games, but I don't have a big Warhammer collection. I do have a large board game collection. So in many ways, I feel like I'm a man out of time in that the things that I liked about nerd culture have been replaced by
Are
other
gone, yeah.
things. And we could have an argument about whether or not it's authentic nerd culture anymore and all that stuff. But I just feel like a little bit like a man out of time. So nowadays, my wife and I watch a lot of foreign television shows. A lot of foreign movies.
Produced shows are so much better than anything Hollywood is doing. Absolutely. And I'm lucky enough that I know a couple of other languages, which lets me kind of, get a little bit of
and like
easier
20 years ago, if you had told me like, yeah, man, in your 40s, you're going to start watching foreign films and foreign TV shows and not go see the superhero movies, I'd be like, what you talking about? But that's
Spain is
how it
making
played
some
out.
incredible Netflix shows and stuff like that. Some great stuff in Spanish Netflix. Anyway, so there's one more question here from the audience, which I wanted to get before we finish off here. Question for Alex and Pundit: what personal satisfaction do you get in producing RPG products?
Well, I mean, certainly I get a lot. If I didn't, I wouldn't do it because the cash remuneration is not that top notch. I think for me, I kind of think of role-playing game design as a lot like building a cathedral, right? In that, cathedrals were the height of Western civilization. They required all of the skills, the art, the sculpture, the architecture, the stonework. It needed the entire community. And RPGs are that way. You have to be able to build a world. You have to be able to write clearly, but you also have to be able to write interesting fictional lore, and you have to be able to create characters. You have to be good at mathematics. You have to be good at history. You have to understand philosophy. Like it's kind of a totality of skills that goes into it. And I find that really, really satisfying. When I do other fields, I feel like I'm only sort of using part of my skill set, right? Like I also write graphic novels. And I feel like I only need 2/3 of what I'm good at to do a graphic novel or writing a novel or things like that. So that would be my personal satisfaction is I feel like I get to exercise all aspects of my intelligence and education in a way that other fields I don't get to do that as much. And as I mentioned earlier, one of my disappointments is that I don't have the full stack to do every aspect of it in the way that I might like. But, we're all human and, nobody is good at everything except for Kevin Crawford. So.
Well, I would say, obviously I make a full-time living writing RPGs at this point. And at the same time, though, I never make a product solely on the idea that it's going to make money, right? I mean, some people have often said, "Oh, we'd love to see Pundit's 5e interpretation, or something like that." And I bet that would make money, but it's just not. And I'm not saying I'll never do it because it could be interesting as a project, but I've got other projects I care more about that I want to get in first, right? And certainly I agree with what you said about like incorporating some of my other background elements into the RPGs I make. In my case, it's very much focused on, I had a history degree and a comparative studies degree, and I'm shocked by how much I've ended up using that education for making RPGs and RPGs that turned out to be popular, right? But it's never been my main agenda was never in the beginning to make an RPG that I thought was going to be a really big seller, right? I was surprised by how increasingly successful they've become, and that's great. But I had a lot of doubts that people might really want to play, an RPG, an OSR game set in a fairly realistic version of England during the War of the Roses, or for that matter, Poland in the 11th century, which is even like more strange to because at least England is something that people have more, at least in the English speaking world, will have more familiarity with. But so I've been happy that the stuff I've made has ended up being able to afford me a full-time living. But I'm always making the products I really want to make, and that's why apart from having helped consult on 5e, which was a lot of fun, there was never any consideration that I was going to then start, even if it hadn't been for the woke stuff or anything like that, I was ever going to start working for an RPG company, because then I'd have to make the products that they want me to make, right? Which I didn't want to do.
Right.
So first and foremost, I'm really enjoying the fact that I can come up with an idea and make the product, and that it'll somehow still sell, but. And of course I want it to sell, but I never make it with the idea, oh, this will sell really well, right, or something like that. And I never know which one's going to be a bigger hit or not as big a hit, So I've made all of my works are labors of love in that sense, in spite of also being a business. And that's what I take the most satisfaction in, is that I'm making the games. Most of the games I've made are games that are based on campaigns I've run. So it's me having not quite found the game that I wanted to have to run a campaign, and then making that game instead, right? That's how Lion and Dragons started out in Dark Albion started as a Lamentations campaign, and Lamentations is a great system, but I saw that it had stuff that didn't really quite match a medieval authentic perspective, and gradually that evolved into Lion and Dragon. So all of my books are really me making the stuff that I like running, and then putting them out in the world, because hopefully other people like it too, and I love, one of the biggest satisfactions I get is hearing from people who have bought and enjoyed my products, and especially people who are playing my games or using my games, and not necessarily the way I might have intended either, because sometimes people come up with like really wild ideas of how to use these games in a totally different way. And I love that, so get that kind of feedback is a huge personal satisfaction to me.
For sure.
Right, so we've completed the 90 minutes, and I want to definitely thank Alex. I want to thank everybody who's been watching. We've still got we got 70 people still watching. We did a peak at like around 80 something.
Nice.
So that's really great. Last chance for anyone who wants to do a super chat if you do a super chat of $5 or more, you'll be able to get from Venture Satanis a PDF copy of Shadow Chult. You just have to send him your drive-through email address. If anyone has any final thoughts, this would be the moment to put it in there. My next RPG Pundit encounter will be on the 17th of November. So that's in 4 weeks. So keep an eye out for it. I still don't know who I'm going to get, but there's a very good chance I'll be getting someone who is maybe not as well known in the hobby as my first two guests, just to do that what I said I was going to do, which is to try to help promote people who are starting out or are a bit more obscure. So I'll be looking around and seeing who I could bring in for that. And we'll be kind of alternating episode by episode. I'll be trying to bring in big names, and then also bring in people who are potential rising stars, I guess.
Amen.
Okay, so no last minute comments that I can see. So all right, I want to thank everybody who watched again, and don't forget, check out Alex's products. I'm going to have him send me links, and I'll add them to the once the post live stream video is up. And check out all my products, subscribe, hit the like button, and feel free to share the video anywhere that you think people will like it, or anywhere people will get pissed off about it. I'm sure there'll be quite a few people pissed off about a live stream between myself and Alex, on a lot of levels. So that's always fun. All right, currently smoking. This is Lorenzetti Volcano with Squadron Leader. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks so much for having me on, man.
Thank you. Take care, guys.